A Midianite princess and an Israelite leader run through together by a single spear. But this brutal act of violence wasn't a crime, it was called a solution. A divine one. It stopped a plague that had already killed 24,000 people and secured a covenant of peace from God Himself. How could such a shocking display of fury be seen as righteous? The story of COZBI and Zimri is one of the most jarring in the entire Bible, and it pulls back the curtain on a terrifying truth about forbidden unions in the face of God. It's a story of politics, plague, and piety that would forever change the destiny of two nations. To get a handle on how something this shocking could even happen, we have to go back in time to the plains of Moab, at a place called Shittim. The people of Israel are at the very end of their 40-year nightmare in the wilderness. They are standing on the doorstep of the Promised Land. This is a generation that never knew slavery in Egypt, only the desert hardships and the direct guidance of God. But with the finish line in sight, a new and far more subtle threat appeared, one that didn't come with an army, but with a quiet invitation. The Israelites were camped right next to the Moabites and the Midianites. These neighbors watched this massive, nomadic nation arrive with a mix of fear and disgust. Realizing they couldn't beat Israel on the battlefield, they tried a different kind of warfare. They tried to poison them from the inside out. The account in Numbers 25 tells us that Israelite men started sleeping with the local Moabite women. But this wasn't just about breaking moral rules. These encounters were invitations to worship their god, Baal of Peor. This was a direct attack on the first commandment, a kind of spiritual treason that threatened to destroy Israel's entire identity as a people set apart for God. And in response, God's anger flared, and a horrifying plague ripped through the camp, a swift and terrible judgment for a nation stumbling at the final hurdle. In the middle of this national disaster, with thousands dying and the leaders in chaos, three people walk into the center of the story. What they do next will become the moment everything turns. First, there's COZBI. The Bible is incredibly specific about who she was. Numbers 25:15 names her as COZBI, the daughter of Zur. And Zur wasn't just some local elder, he was a king, the head of a major Midianite clan. This means COZBI was a princess. Some scholars believe her name might even mean deceiver, hinting that her role was strategic. She wasn't some common woman caught up in a forbidden romance, she was a political and religious chess piece, a high-status woman representing a people actively trying to corrupt Israel. Her being in the Israelite camp was a calculated move. Then, there's Zimri. Just like COZBI, he wasn't a nobody. The scripture identifies him as the son of Salu, a prince from a leading family in the tribe of Simeon. He was an Israelite leader, a man with rank and influence. What he did mattered. When a regular person sins, it's a personal failure. But when a leader sins, it's a public rebellion. It's an act that gives a green light to others and openly spits on the established order. Zimri's choice wasn't a private moment of weakness, it was a loud, arrogant act of defiance. And finally, there's Phinehas. He was the grandson of Aaron, Israel's very first high priest. Phinehas was a man from a holy bloodline raised on the laws of the covenant and the sacredness of God's presence. He represents the line of priestly authority, the guardian of Israel's spiritual health. As the plague raged and the nation's leaders seemed frozen in grief, Phinehas just watched. He was a man of God, and what he saw next would light a fire in him that the Bible calls zeal. The scene that unfolds is almost hard to believe. Moses and the elders of Israel are gathered at the entrance to the tabernacle, the very center of God's presence on earth. They are on the ground, weeping. They're mourning the thousands already dead from the plague and crying out to God to have mercy. The air is thick with crisis and desperation. And it's into this sacred space of national grief that Zimri walks. He isn't alone. In full view of Moses, right in front of the entire weeping congregation, he brings COZBI, the Midianite princess, into his family's tent. This wasn't some sin hidden in the shadows. This was a performance. A deliberate, public spectacle. It was the ultimate act of contempt for God, for Moses, and for his entire community. It was a political statement, a declaration that he, a prince in Israel, would not follow the laws of a God who was, at that very moment, judging the nation. He was flaunting his sin, raising his own desires above the survival of his people and the honor of his God. This shameless act was the breaking point. When Phinehas, the priest's grandson, saw it, something inside him snapped. The scripture says he was filled with zeal, a burning, passionate jealousy for God's honor. He got up from the crowd, left the place of weeping, and went to his tent. He didn't grab a sword to rally an army, he took a single spear. He walked straight to Zimri's tent. He didn't hesitate. He thrust the spear right through the tent, impaling both Zimri the Israelite prince and COZBI the Midianite princess, killing them both in the middle of their defiance. The instant the spear found its mark, the plague stopped. The divine judgment that had swept through the camp and claimed 24,000 lives was over. The act of one man's righteous fury had paid the price for the sin of a nation. God speaks directly to Moses right after this, and his words are stunning. He doesn't condemn Phinehas for the violence. He praises him. God says that Phinehas has turned my wrath away from the Israelites, because he was zealous for my sake among them. Because of this one act, God makes a deep and lasting promise to Phinehas. He gives him a covenant of peace and a promise of an everlasting priesthood. This meant the line of the high priest would now pass down through his family forever. His zeal didn't just save the nation in that moment, it secured a holy future for his entire bloodline. This was so important that it was remembered for generations. In Psalm 106, the act is retold, saying that what Phinehas did was credited to him as righteousness for all generations to come. But while peace was made with Phinehas, a new order was given, war with Midian. God commands Moses, treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them, because they treated you as enemies when they deceived you. In the affair of COZBI, the daughter of a Midianite leader, their sister who was killed on the day of the plague. The sin wasn't swept under the rug. God specifically named COZBI's identity as a princess as part of the reason for the war. This wasn't just about punishing a few people, it was a major political shift. The Midianites, by using seduction and idolatry as a weapon, had declared themselves an enemy of Israel and its God. Now, they would be treated like one. The story comes to a head later in the book of Numbers, when Israel goes to war with Midian and, among the 5 Midianite kings they kill, is Zer, COZBI's own father. This story really challenges our modern ideas about justice and religion, forcing us to look at some of the hard realities of the Old Testament. Figuring out these difficult passages is a huge part of understanding the entire biblical story. If you get value from these deep dives into the Bible's most complex and sometimes shocking stories, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of the scriptures. Conclusion: the legacy of a forbidden union. So, what are we supposed to do with a story like this today? The tale of COZBI, Zimri, and Phinehas is so much more than an ancient scandal involving sex, power, and a spear. It's a heavy theological drama playing out on a human stage. It shows us just how seriously the Bible takes public sin, especially from leaders. Zimri's sin was a catastrophe, not just because of what he did, but because of who he was and how publicly he did it. His open defiance was like a cancer in the heart of the nation, and the story argues that it required a shocking, surgical removal. It's a stark example of the biblical idea that the health of the whole community can sometimes demand a severe price from one individual. The story also makes us wrestle with the idea of zeal. Today, we tend to be suspicious of zeal, often confusing it with fanaticism. But in the Bible, zeal for God's honor is held up as a good thing. Phinehas's zeal was a passionate loyalty to God's holiness at a moment when everyone else was paralyzed with fear and grief. His action wasn't seen as a murderous rage, but as an act of justice that saved the very foundation of the nation's relationship with God. And finally, COZBI's story is a brutal reminder of the political and spiritual stakes of idolatry. The fact that she was a Midianite princess makes it clear that this whole episode was a calculated plan to weaken Israel. It was a kind of ancient hybrid warfare that used culture and religion as weapons. The union of COZBI and Zimri was forbidden not out of simple prejudice, but because it represented the blending of two identities, one sworn to Yahweh, the other devoted to Baal. In the world of the Bible, a union like that could only ever end in disaster. The violent deaths of COZBI and Zimri serve as a grim monument in Israel's history, a testament to a moment when a forbidden union unleashed a plague, and only the violent zeal of a single priest could stop the dying. It sealed the hatred between Israel and Midian and burned a terrifying lesson about the cost of defiance into the memory of God's people.